The U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry has called on Syrian President Bashar al-Assad to commit to finding peace in his country. Kerry warned that the conflict in Syria was intensifying, with thousands of Lebanese Hezbollah fighters now lending their support to the Assad government. Speaking in Jordan, he said the U.S. would increase its support for Syria's rebels if President Bashar al-Assad refused to discuss a political end to the civil war that was spreading across borders. Syria's main opposition group is calling for reinforcements to be sent to rebel fighters in the strategic town of Qusayr, where the fighting has continued for a fourth straight day. Joining me now to talk more about the crisis in Syria is James Gelvin. He's professor of modern Middle East history at the University of California, Los Angeles, and author of The Arab Uprising, What Everyone Needs to Know. Let's start there with this recent fighting. Why is this piece of real estate so important to both sides, would you say?
It's immensely strategic. It is right between, on the one hand, the Lebanese border to its west, and to its east, the main north-south route in Syria, connecting Damascus with Homs, Hama, and then Aleppo. If the opposition loses the city of Qusayr, they will lose a major supply route that comes from Lebanon to their forces, and they will also now be facing the Syrian army on two fronts, both from the north and from the south, from Damascus as well. Their position in Damascus will therefore be jeopardized.
Let me ask you about Lebanon. I was in Beirut a couple of years ago, and the people that I was talking to there were very concerned that this had a spillover effect, and we're starting to see indications of that as well. Is Lebanon likely to get sucked into all of this?
Well, Lebanon is very involved in this right now in a number of ways. First of all, Hezbollah is a Lebanese party, and there are Hezbollah people in Syria now in combat operations. We hadn't known that before, and apparently they're quite effective, far more effective than the Syrian army is. In addition to that, what we have on the border now is skirmishing taking place between, on the one hand, Hezbollah, and on the other hand, various groups, including some jihadi groups, that are exchanging mortar fire and other forms of fire back and forth. And then finally, Lebanon has always been noted for sectarian tensions, and those tensions are rising right now, particularly in places like Tripoli and in the border area that's right next to Syria, where Hezbollah has been deploying, but there's a strong Sunni population in Lebanon that is now working with the opposition.
James, talk to me about the proxy war quality of this war, because it seems like there's so many vested interests, not just within Syria, but outside it as well.
Yes, I mean, it's absolutely right, and it's a very good question. What we're looking at now is not a civil war in Syria. What we're looking at is a front in a larger confrontation about what the future of the Middle East is going to look like. On the one side, what you have is Western powers, the United States, you have Saudi Arabia and Qatar, you have Turkey that are supporting the opposition in various ways. On the other hand, what you have is Syria itself, the government, you have Iran, you have Hezbollah, and you have Russians as well that are supporting the government, or actually the government itself. So therefore, what we see now is a struggle that's taking place. And if, for example, the government in Syria falls, then what we're going to see is a valued member of the so-called resistance alliance probably switching sides, becoming less prone, or not prone at all actually, to working with the Iranians, who are now working with the government.
James, we've got about a minute and a half, but I've got to ask you, is the West likely to arm these rebels, do you think?
The West is arming the rebels. There's no doubt about that so far. The question is, what more will the West do actually to escalate? And the question is, what will America's involvement be? No-fly zone, or setting up safe havens, or something along those lines. There are people in the United States Congress who want to get the United States very involved. The President of the United States doesn't want any part of it at the present time.
And so, James, I know there aren't a lot of good options. We've got about 30 seconds. I know you can't whittle it down to that, but what do you think is the next best step? I mean, Kerry's obviously pushing for some peace talks. Is that likely to make much of a difference?
Not at all. The only way in which peace talks can possibly work is if the opposition, and all the members of the opposition, the government, the United States, Russia, Iran, and Saudi Arabia all agree that the situation is hopelessly stalemated. They have to do that at the exact same time. It's very, very unlikely that's going to take place.
This is not going to be Lebanon, though, where it's a 15-year war, do you think?
Uh, it's very likely it's going to be Somalia, in which there's going to be low-intensity combat for a very long period of time.
James Gelvin, thank you so much for joining us from Los Angeles this evening. Certainly appreciate it.